Billionaire tech genius Thaddeus Blackwood visits his ex-wife's grave on the anniversary of her death, only to discover 4 identical 9-year-old girls weeping at the same headstone, and when they look up, they immediately recognize him and call him Daddy. But how can that be possible when doctors had assured him he could never have children? And why did these girls grow up thinking he had abandoned them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sleek, titanium grey Aston Martin DB12 glided silently through the wrought iron gates of Evergreen Memorial Gardens, its electric motor barely disturbing the solemn atmosphere. A light October mist clung to the ancient oak trees, shrouding the cemetery in an ethereal veil that suited Thaddeus Blackwood's somber mood. Today marked 5 years since Lyra's passing. 5 years since he had lost the only woman who had ever seen through his carefully constructed facade to the wounded soul beneath. Their marriage had lasted barely 3 years before irreconcilable differences and his inability to give her the family she desperately wanted had torn them apart. But even after the divorce, some invisible thread had kept them connected in ways neither could explain. Thaddeus parked the car and reached for the bouquet of rare black dahlias, Lyra's favorite. At 47, he cut an imposing figure, 6'3", with shoulders that still carried the athletic build of his rugby days at Oxford. His once jet-black hair now featured distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, and lines had formed around his piercing jade eyes. Eyes that had stared down corporate rivals and government officials alike as he built Obsidian Technologies into a trillion-dollar empire. An empire that felt increasingly hollow with each passing year. Mr. Blackwood, your conference call with Tokyo is in 3 hours, his AI assistant reminded him through his earpiece. Silence all communications. Until further notice, Minerva, he commanded, his British accent still noticeable despite 2 decades in America. The cemetery's winding path led him through a grove of weeping willows toward the private mausoleum he'd commissioned for Lyra. Italian marble and obsidian, elegant yet understated. She would have appreciated the aesthetics if not the extravagance. As he rounded the final bend, he stopped abruptly. 4 small figures huddled before Lyra's memorial, identical in their burgundy private school uniforms, their copper-red hair, Lyra's distinctive shade, falling in identical waves down their backs. 4 pairs of small shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Children crying at Lyra's grave. Thaddeus approached cautiously, clearing his throat to announce his presence without startling them. As one, they turned, and Thaddeus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. 4 identical faces stared back at him, tear-streaked and solemn. But it was their eyes that punched the air from his lungs, a unique jade green with a burst of amber around. The pupils, his eyes, his mother's eyes, the rare heterochromia that had marked the Blackwood lineage for generations. Daddy, the tallest of the 4 whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The bouquet slipped from Thaddeus's fingers, black petals scattering across the damp earth. Impossible. The specialists had been unanimous in their diagnosis. His childhood illness had left him sterile. It was the primary reason Lyra had eventually left, his refusal to consider adoption when he couldn't give her biological children. "You look just like the pictures," said another of the girls, taking a tentative step forward. "What pictures? Who are you?" Thaddeus managed, his normally commanding voice reduced to a rasp. "I'm Arwen," said the one who had first spoken. "These are my sisters. That's Freya, Vesper, and Octavia." She pointed to each in turn. Vesper, the smallest, clutched a worn photograph in her tiny hand. With trembling fingers, she extended it toward him. Thaddeus took it, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. The photo showed a much younger version of himself with Lyra, both smiling radiantly at a charity gala during the early days of their marriage. On the back, written in Lyra's distinctive flowing script, "Thaddeus and me, the night our miracles were conceived. Someday he'll know." 9 years. These children would have been conceived just before their separation. When Lyra had approached, him claiming a miracle pregnancy, he had accused her of infidelity. The argument that followed had been the final breaking point. "Where is your guardian?" Thaddeus asked, struggling to maintain his composure as his reality reconstructed itself around this impossible truth. "Aunt Persephone brought us," Freya replied, pointing toward a distant figure on a bench, watching them intently. "She said it was time we met at Mom's special place." Thaddeus recognized the woman immediately, Lyra's younger sister, who had never forgiven him for the divorce. The sister who had refused his calls when Lyra fell ill, who had kept him from attending the funeral. "How did you know who I am?" he asked, returning his attention to the children, his children, before him. Octavia, who had remained silent until now, opened a small locket hanging around her neck. Inside was a miniature version of the same photograph. "Mom gave us these before she went to heaven. She said you didn't know about us, but someday we would find each other." "We live with Aunt Persephone now," Arwen explained, "but she gets sick a lot. The doctors say she can't take care of us much longer." Thaddeus felt a surge of emotions he couldn't name. Anger at being kept in the dark, grief for the years lost, confusion about the medical impossibility before him, and beneath it all, a primal recognition. These were his daughters. Somehow, against all odds, they were his. His phone vibrated insistently in his pocket, Tokyo calling early. The intrusion of his other life, the empire he had built to fill the void Lyra left, suddenly seemed trivial compared to the revelation before. "Him, would you like to see our ballerina recital certificate?" Vesper asked, misinterpreting his silence for doubt. "Mom always said we got our dancer genes from you." A memory surfaced, Lyra discovering old photos of him in ballet classes. A short-lived childhood activity his father had despised and eventually forbidden. A detail so intimate only Lyra would know to tell their daughters. "I would like that very much," Thaddeus replied, his voice steadying as he made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his life. "But first, I think I should speak with your Aunt Persephone." As he approached the bench where Persephone sat, her expression hardened. She was a waif-like woman, her once vibrant beauty now hollowed by what appeared to be chronic illness. The family resemblance to Lyra was striking and painful. "Persephone," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Thaddeus," she replied coolly, "I see you've met your daughters." "Why now?" he asked, cutting directly to the heart of the matter. "Why? Keep them from me for 9 years only to arrange this." Theatrical introduction. Persephone's bitter laugh dissolved into a cough. When she recovered, she fixed him with a penetrating stare. "I have stage 4 lymphoma, 6 months at best. I needed to know they'd be taken care of by someone who could protect them." "Protect them from what? I didn't even know they existed until 5 minutes ago." She reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Lyra left this for you, to be delivered only if something happened to both of us. I was supposed to wait until I was gone, but she gestured vaguely at her frail form. "I don't have the luxury of time anymore." Thaddeus accepted the envelope, his name written in Lyra's handwriting sending a jolt through his system. "This doesn't explain why she kept them from me in the first place, doesn't it?" Persephone challenged. "You called her a liar and a cheat when she told you she was pregnant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You, with your precious medical diagnosis, couldn't accept a miracle when it was staring you in the face." The accusation stung because it contained more than a grain of truth. Thaddeus glanced back at the girls, now gathered around Lyra's headstone, arranging small tokens they had brought, drawings, tiny ballet slippers, a miniature telescope. How did she manage to hide quadruplets for 9 years? He asked, genuinely baffled. Lyra had been a moderately successful artist, but nothing in her financial background suggested the resources necessary for such a feat. She didn't hide them from the world, Thaddeus, only from you. Persephone's expression softened slightly. She moved to Cassiopeia Island after the divorce, her grandmother's homeland. It's a small artist community off the northern coast. Remote. Enough that news of the Blackwood quadruplets wouldn't reach your rarefied corporate atmosphere. Cassiopeia Island. Thaddeus had never heard of it, which was precisely the point, he supposed. The girls need stability, Thaddeus. They need their father. The question is, are you capable of being that for them? Persephone challenged. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated again, more urgently this time. The Tokyo deal. The board, meeting, the quarterly projections, the empty penthouse awaiting his return. I need to make some calls, he said finally. Persephone nodded, unsurprised. We're staying at the Archipelago Hotel through Sunday. The girls and I have a standing breakfast in the solarium at 8. She stood shakily. I should collect them. This has been emotional enough for one day. As she walked away, Thaddeus opened Lyra's letter with trembling fingers. The familiar scent of her lavender perfume wafted from the paper, transporting him instantly to happier times. My dearest Thaddeus, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means our daughters have finally found their way to you. Part 2, Revelations and Resistance. The Archipelago Hotel's exclusive diamond suite seemed cavernous as Thaddeus paced its length, phone pressed to his ear. The Tokyo acquisition that had consumed 6 months of meticulous planning was unraveling in real time. Postpone, delegate. I don't care how you handle it, Lyra, he told his COO. Family emergency, indefinite duration. Family! Lyra Vega's surprise was evident even across continents. In 15 years working together, Thaddeus had never once mentioned family as a priority over business. I'll explain when I return. Just keep Bellamy from making any unilateral decisions while I'm away. He disconnected before she could ask further questions. Thaddeus turned to the window, watching dawn break over the unfamiliar skyline. After leaving the cemetery, he had checked into this hotel rather than returning to his penthouse, needing neutral territory to process Lyra's letter. The revelation had been devastating. Not only had Lyra told him about the pregnancy, but she had sent multiple updates during her high-risk quadruplet pregnancy. Ultrasound images, medical reports, birth announcements, all intercepted and hidden by his chief of staff, Bellamy Frost, on the grounds of protecting Mr. Blackwood from obvious attempts at extortion. Lyra had documented everything, including her attempts to reach him when the girls were born premature, requiring expensive medical interventions she could barely afford. Her final attempt at contact had been 5 years ago, when her diagnosis became terminal. Bellamy had blocked that too, ensuring Thaddeus remained ignorant while Lyra slipped away. A betrayal so complete it left him breathless. The sunrise glinted off a collection of glass towers in the distance, Obsidian Technologies' East Coast headquarters. The empire he had built from nothing, the legacy he had assumed would be his only mark on the world. At 7:30, Thaddeus entered the hotel solarium, arriving early to collect his thoughts before meeting the girls and Persephone for breakfast. The space was a marvel of architectural glass, filled with exotic plants and overlooking the hotel's private garden. His solitude was short-lived. A small figure appeared beside an enormous bird of paradise plant, observing him with solemn intensity. "Octavia," he said, recognizing the quietest of the quadruplets, "you're up early." "I like watching the sunrise," she replied, approaching cautiously. "Mom said you do too." The simple observation, One more piece of intimate knowledge Lyra had shared with their daughters pierced him. "I do," he confirmed. "The beginning of each day feels possible." Octavia nodded as if he'd passed some test. "Are you really our father?" The directness of the question, delivered in such a childish voice, demanded equal honesty. "Yes," Thaddeus answered, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "I believe I am." "Then why weren't you there when Mom was sick, when she called for you?" The accusation hung between them, all the more powerful for its quiet delivery. "I didn't know," Thaddeus said, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "If I had known about you, about your mother's illness, nothing would have kept me away. Nothing." Octavia studied him with unnerving intensity, those Blackwood eyes, his eyes, seeming to peer into his soul. "Aunt Persephone says you're very rich, that you have buildings with your name on them." "That's true. But we had to sell Mom's paintings to pay for medicine." The simple statement, delivered with a child's brutal honesty, struck harder than any corporate negotiation. Before Thaddeus could formulate a response, the other three girls entered with Persephone. Breakfast was a surreal experience. The quadruplets, while identical in appearance, revealed distinctly different personalities. Arwen, the natural leader, organized her sisters and directed conversation. Freya, analytical and precise, corrected factual inaccuracies and kept track of time. Vesper, imaginative and expressive, illustrated her points with dramatic gestures. And Octavia, observant and thoughtful, spoke rarely but with impact. They were, collectively and individually, extraordinary. "We have questions," Arwen announced as the meal concluded, pulling a folded paper from her uniform pocket. "We made a list." Thaddeus smiled despite himself. "Of course you did. Number 1, she began formally. "Will we have to leave our school? We have friends there." "What school do you attend?" "Callisto Academy," Freya supplied. "For gifted children. We're all on scholarship." Pride colored her voice. Thaddeus recognized the name. One of the most prestigious experimental education centers in the country, with a focus on developing exceptional talent. "No, you won't have to leave your school." "Number 2, Arwen continued, "will we have to move away from Aunt Persephone?" Thaddeus glanced at Persephone, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "That's something we'll need to discuss." "Further," he hedged. "Number 3, do you even want us?" The bluntness silenced the room. 4 identical faces turned to him, vulnerability evident beneath their precocious composure. "Yes," Thaddeus answered without hesitation. "I want to know you, to be part of your lives. I've missed 9 years. I don't want to miss another day." "Number 4, Arwen pressed on, though her voice had softened. "Are you going to take a DNA test? Aunt Persephone says that's what rich men do when they don't trust people." Thaddeus considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally, "I don't need a test to know you're my daughters." The answer seemed to satisfy them, but Persephone's expression remained skeptical. "Final question," Arwen said, refolding the paper. "When can we see where you live?" That evening, after numerous calls to his household staff, Thaddeus brought the girls to his penthouse for dinner. The 3-story residence occupied the crown of the Obsidian Tower, offering 360-degree views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. "It looks like a spaceship," Vesper breathed, pressing her face against the glass. "Where are all your things?" Freya asked, noting the minimalist decor. "What do you mean?" "Your books, your collections, your memories," she clarified, gesturing to the austere surroundings. "Where do you keep what matters?" The innocent question struck him forcefully. The truth was, nothing here really mattered to him. The penthouse was a showcase, a statement of status rather than a home. He had kept nothing of sentimental value after Lyra left. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that might evoke the pain of their separation. "Perhaps we could find some things that matter together," he suggested. As the evening progressed, Thaddeus observed his daughters with growing wonder. They moved through his sterile domain, transforming it with their curious energy. Vesper discovered the grand piano he had never learned to play and revealed she had inherited Lyra's musical talent. Freya methodically catalogued the contents of his bookshelves, rearranging volumes into a more logical order. Octavia silently explored his private art gallery, pausing longest before an abstract painting, the only piece by Lyra he had kept. Arwen, meanwhile, had found her way to his home office and was examining the family crest displayed on the wall. "The Blackwood insignia," Thaddeus explained, joining her. "It represents our family legacy." "Our family," she repeated, testing the words. "Mom has had paintings of this symbol. She said it was part of our heritage, even if you never acknowledged us." The comment stung, but before he could respond, his private elevator chimed. The doors opened to reveal Bellamy Frost, his chief of staff, immaculately dressed despite the late hour. "Mr. Blackwood, you've been unreachable all day. The board is in chaos. Tokyo is threatening to walk and—" Bellamy stopped abruptly, registering the presence of the four identical girls. His normally impassive face registered shock, quickly masked. "I apologize for the intrusion. I wasn't aware you had guests." "Bellamy," Thaddeus said, his voice dangerously calm. "Meet Arwen, Freya, Vesper, and Octavia, my daughters." Bellamy's complexion paled. I don't understand." "Don't you?" Thaddeus challenged. "No recollection of intercepting communications from Lyra Blackwood over the years? Medical records, birth announcements, requests for assistance during her illness?" "Sir, I've always acted in your best interest," Bellamy began, composure cracking. "After the divorce, we agreed Ms. Blackwood was unstable. The pregnancy claim was clearly false, given your medical history." "Yet here they stand," Thaddeus interrupted, gesturing to the quadruplets who were watching the exchange with wary fascination. "4 living proofs that you lied to me for nearly a decade, depriving me of my children and them of their father." "What's happening?" Vesper whispered loudly to Arwen. "I believe Daddy just fired this man," Arwen replied with surprising satisfaction. "Fired is an inadequate term for what's about to happen," Thaddeus corrected, reaching for his phone. "Lyra, I need the legal team. Yes, now. And contact security to escort Bellamy from the building. His credentials are being revoked as we speak." As Bellamy was removed from the penthouse, Thaddeus turned to find his daughters regarding him with new eyes, a mixture of wariness and something like respect. "He kept Mom's letters from you?" Octavia asked quietly. "Yes," Thaddeus confirmed, kneeling to their level. "I never knew she was trying to reach me. I never knew about you." "Would you have come if you knew?" Freya pressed, ever the pragmatist. "Immediately," Thaddeus promised. "Nothing would have kept me away." Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in the guest suite his staff had hastily prepared, Thaddeus sat alone in his office, examining the contents of a secure file Lyra had sent over. The preliminary investigation into Bellamy's activities revealed a disturbing pattern. Not only had his chief of staff intercepted Lyra's communications, but he had actively monitored her movements after the divorce, flagging any attempt she made to contact Thaddeus's professional or social circles. Most disturbing was evidence that Bellamy had redirected significant funds from Thaddeus's personal accounts, funds that had apparently financed a lavish lifestyle far beyond his salary. But why go to such lengths? What could Bellamy possibly gain from keeping Thaddeus ignorant of his own children? The answer lay buried in the final pages of the report. Transfers to a shell corporation that traced back to Chimera Biotech, Obsidian's chief rival, and the company currently poised to benefit most from the collapse of the Tokyo deal. Bellamy hadn't just betrayed Thaddeus personally, he had been working as a corporate spy, actively undermining Obsidian from within. Keeping Thaddeus isolated, workaholic, and emotionally disconnected had served his handler's purposes perfectly. A soft noise from the doorway interrupted his thoughts. Octavia stood there in borrowed pajamas, clutching a small, stuffed rabbit. "You should be asleep," Thaddeus said gently. "I heard you thinking," she replied cryptically. "Mum could always tell when my brain wouldn't turn off too." He smiled despite himself. "Would you like some warm milk? That used to help me sleep when I was your age." Octavia shook her head. "I want to show you something." She approached his desk and carefully placed a folded paper before him. "Mom made us each one before she died. She said to give them to you when we found you." Thaddeus unfolded what appeared to be a child's drawing, 4 identical stick figures holding hands with a much taller one. Below, in a child's careful printing, "Our family someday. Love, Octavia." "She made us draw these every year on our birthday," Octavia explained. "Said if we kept believing, eventually they'd come true." Thaddeus felt something crack inside his carefully maintained composure. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Octavia studied him with those uncanny eyes. "You're sad like we were, but maybe now we can all be less sad together." With that profound observation, she turned and padded back to bed, leaving Thaddeus to contemplate a truth so simple, yet so transformative, it threatened to overwhelm him. Perhaps they could all be less sad together. Part 3. Redemption and Resolution. 2 months later, the transformation of Thaddeus Blackwood's life was evident to anyone who knew him. The penthouse had evolved from a sterile showcase into a living space, marked by evidence of the quadruplets, musical instruments, art supplies, books strewn on every surface, and photographs, countless photographs documenting their belated introduction to each other's lives. Most telling was Thaddeus himself. The corporate titan, known for his ruthless efficiency and emotional detachment, now organized his schedule around school recitals and doctor's appointments. The man who had once considered weekend work mandatory now reserved Saturdays for what the girls called adventure days, excursions designed to help them discover each other's interests and passions. Today's adventure had brought them back to Evergreen Memorial Gardens. The November chill had given way to December frost, and their breath clouded in the air as they approached Lyra's memorial. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Thaddeus asked gently. 4 solemn nods answered him. Together, they had decided it was time to create a proper memorial service for Lyra, something more intimate than the formal funeral they had attended without knowing their father existed. Persephone joined them. Her condition visibly deteriorated, but her spirit undimmed. The experimental treatment Thaddeus had arranged access to had bought her time, if not a cure. Lyra would be pleased, she acknowledged, the first genuine approval she had expressed toward Thaddeus since their reunion. The simple ceremony was led by the girls themselves. Each had prepared something special. Arwen read a poem she had written. Freya arranged photographs in a timeline of their mother's life. Vesper performed a piece she had composed on a small travel keyboard. And Octavia unveiled a painting that captured Lyra's spirit with uncanny precision. As they concluded, Thaddeus stepped forward with his own contribution, a small marble sculpture of a phoenix, carved by an artist from Cassiopeia Island, whom Lyra had admired. "For new beginnings," he said simply, placing it atop the headstone. Afterward, they gathered at a small cafe near the cemetery. While the girls were distracted by hot chocolate and pastries, Persephone drew Thaddeus aside. "The adoption papers arrived yesterday," she said without preamble. Thaddeus tensed. Despite DNA confirmation and his uncontested paternity claim, securing legal guardianship had proven complex due to the unusual circumstances. "And," he prompted when she didn't continue. "I've signed them," she said, withdrawing an envelope from her purse. "They're your daughters, Thaddeus. They always have been." The significance of this final barrier lifting wasn't lost on him. "Thank you." Persephone's gaze drifted to the girls. "I didn't do it for you." Lyra wanted them to know their father. For all her pain, she never stopped believing you would have wanted them if you had known. "She was right," Thaddeus said quietly. "There's something else you should know," Persephone continued, her voice dropping further. "Bellamy didn't act alone." Thaddeus stilled. The investigation into his former chief of staff had revealed extensive corporate espionage, but had yet to identify his primary contact at Chimera Biotech. "How do you know this?" "Because he approached Lyra directly after you separated, offered her money to disappear permanently, to never contact you again about the pregnancy, said it would be better for everyone." "She refused," Thaddeus surmised, "vehemently. That's when she decided to move to Cassiopeia Island, not just to connect with her roots, but because she was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Persephone hesitated. "Of who might be pulling Bellamy's strings, someone with enough influence to make her, and later your daughters, truly disappear if necessary." A chill that had nothing to do with the December air swept through Thaddeus. "Did she know who?" "She had suspicions. Before she died, she gave me a safety deposit key. Said if anything happened to her under suspicious circumstances, I should open it." Persephone withdrew a small key from her locket. "I never needed to use it, because her death, while tragic, was medically expected. But perhaps you should see what she felt was worth such precaution." Back at Obsidian Tower, while the girls were engaged with their newly hired tutor, Thaddeus called an emergency meeting with his security team. The revelation about Bellamy having directly threatened Lyra changed the complexion of the entire situation, from corporate espionage to something far more sinister. "Lyra, what's the status on the Chimera connection?" he asked as his COO joined the video conference. "We've traced financial pathways through 7 shell corporations," she reported, "but we're hitting sophisticated roadblocks tracing it to any specific executive. Someone high enough to authorize significant resources, but careful enough to remain invisible," Thaddeus mused. "Keep digging and increase security on the residential floors immediately." After the meeting, Thaddeus examined the safety deposit key Persephone had given him. The bank name was unfamiliar, a small local institution on Cassiopeia Island rather than one of the national chains. A quick search revealed it still existed, though barely, having resisted numerous buyout attempts over the years. That resistance struck Thaddeus as significant, given what he was learning about Chimera's pattern of acquiring and dismantling smaller entities that might contain compromising information. 3 days later, Thaddeus stood inside the modest island bank, the contents of Lyra's safety deposit box spread before him. Most were documents he expected: duplicate birth certificates for the girls, medical records, photographs, letters she had written to him but never sent. But beneath these, sealed in a waterproof pouch, he found something unexpected: a data drive and a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, you've found our daughters," Lyra had written. "And if you're the man I believe you still are, you're looking for answers. This drive contains everything I discovered about Chimera's Erebus project while working as a commissioned artist for their corporate retreat. It's why Bellamy tried to pay me off, and when that failed, why they worked so hard to keep us apart. They couldn't risk what I might tell you, what might trigger your memory." "Trigger his memory?" Thaddeus frowned, uncertain what she meant. "The accident that supposedly caused your infertility wasn't an accident at all, Thaddeus. It was a clinical trial gone wrong, one of Chimera's early experiments before your father's company acquired them. An experiment you were part of without proper consent, as were dozens of other boys at that exclusive boarding school. Most suffered permanent damage. You were actually one of the lucky ones. Your damage was significant, but not complete." Thaddeus felt the blood drain from his face as fragmented memories surfaced. A prestigious summer science program, unexpected illness, a lengthy hospitalization. They've buried the evidence, silenced the victims through settlements with ironclad NDAs, and restructured repeatedly to distance the current corporation from its origins. But our daughters are living proof of what they did and what they've concealed. Their very existence threatens the foundation of Chimera's legitimacy. The final paragraph chilled him to the bone. If you're reading this and I'm gone, protect our girls, Thaddeus. Chimera can't afford for Blackwood quadruplets to exist, not just for what they represent about your supposedly impossible fertility, but because multiple identical offspring from a trial subject raises questions about genetic manipulation that could destroy the company. Questions that might lead back to current experiments I glimpsed documentation for. Experiments they call Project Erebus. Back at Obsidian Tower, Thaddeus had the drive's contents analyzed by his most trusted security experts in a sealed room, isolated from any networks. What they found verified Lyra's claims and worse, evidence of ongoing human trials, genetic manipulation beyond current ethical boundaries, and a systematic cover-up spanning decades. Most disturbing was the name that appeared repeatedly throughout the documents, the architect of both the original experiments and the subsequent cover-up. Lysander Blackwood, Thaddeus's uncle and current chairman of Obsidian's board. The revelation brought clarity to a lifetime of family dynamics, his uncle's insistence on certain medical treatments throughout Thaddeus's childhood, his opposition to Thaddeus's marriage, to Lyra, and his continued efforts to push Obsidian toward biotech acquisitions despite Thaddeus's resistance. As the pieces fell into place, Thaddeus realized with growing horror that the danger to his daughters wasn't theoretical, it was immediate, and came from within his own family circle. Lysander had spent decades burying evidence of the experiments that had damaged Thaddeus and countless others. The quadruplets' existence threatened everything he had built. That night, as Thaddeus checked on his sleeping daughters, his resolve crystallized. The empire he had built, the legacy he had once valued above all else, none of it mattered compared to these 4 small lives entrusted to his care. The next morning, while the girls were at school with doubled security, Thaddeus entered the Obsidian boardroom for the first time in months. The assembled directors fell silent as he took his position at the head of the table. "Unusual to see you in person these days, Thaddeus," Lysander observed coolly. At 73, he remained imposing, the family resemblance evident in the same jade eyes, though his lacked the distinctive amber burst. "I thought this conversation required a personal touch," Thaddeus replied, nodding to security personnel who moved to position themselves at the doors, "especially since it concerns family matters." Lysander's expression betrayed nothing, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his leather portfolio. "I wasn't aware we had family business before the board." "Not before the board. No." Thaddeus activated the room's privacy protocols, shutting down recording devices and sealing communications. "This is between you and me, Uncle, about Project Erebus, about what happened at Whitmore Academy 35 years ago, about my daughters." The color drained from Lysander's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Thaddeus opened a folder containing printouts from Lyra's drive. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths to hide this truth, manipulating my medical records, having Bellamy intercept Lyra's communications, isolating me from the possibility of discovering I could father children after all. These are serious accusations," Lysander said carefully, eyes darting to the other board members who were watching with growing concern. "They are. As is illegally experimenting on minors, falsifying medical records, bribing officials, and conspiracy to commit what could arguably be classified as attempted murder." Sar-17, murmurs rippled through the boardroom. The Archipelago Hotel's exclusive diamond suite seemed cavernous as Thaddeus paced its length, phone pressed to his ear. The Tokyo acquisition that had consumed 6 months of meticulous planning was unraveling. In real time. Postpone, delegate. I don't care how you handle it, Lyra, he told his COO. Family emergency, indefinite duration. Family? Lyra Vega's surprise was evident even across continents. In 15 years working together, Thaddeus had never once mentioned family as a priority over business. I'll explain when I return. Just keep Bellamy from making any unilateral decisions while I'm away. He disconnected before she could ask. Further questions. Thaddeus turned to the window, watching dawn break over the unfamiliar skyline. After leaving the cemetery, he had checked into this hotel rather than returning to his penthouse, needing neutral territory to process Lyra's letter. The revelation had been devastating. Not only had Lyra told him about the pregnancy, but she had sent multiple updates during her high-risk quadruplet pregnancy. Ultrasound images, medical reports, birth announcements, all intercepted and hidden by his Chief of Staff Bellamy Frost, on the grounds of protecting Mr. Blackwood from obvious attempts at extortion. Lyra had documented everything, including her attempts to reach him when the girls were born premature, requiring expensive medical intervention she could barely afford. Her final attempt at contact had been 5 years ago, when her diagnosis became terminal. Bellamy had blocked that too, ensuring Thaddeus remained ignorant while Lyra slipped away. A betrayal so complete, it left him breathless. The sunrise glinted off a collection of glass towers in the distance, Obsidian Technologies' East Coast headquarters. The empire he had built from nothing, the legacy he had assumed would be his only mark on the world. At 7:30, Thaddeus entered the Hotel Solarium, arriving early to collect his thoughts before meeting the girls and Persephone for breakfast. The space was a marvel of architectural glass, filled with exotic plants and overlooking the hotel's private garden. His solitude was short-lived. A small figure appeared beside an enormous bird of paradise plant, observing him with solemn intensity. "Octavia," he said, recognizing the quietest of the quadruplets. "You're up early." "I like watching the sunrise," she replied, approaching cautiously. "Mom said you do too." The simple observation, one more piece of intimate knowledge Lyra had shared with their daughters, pierced him. "I do," he confirmed. "The beginning of each day feels possible." Octavia nodded, as if he'd passed some test. "Are you really our father?" The directness of the question, delivered in such a childish voice, demanded equal honesty. "Yes," Thaddeus answered, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "I believe I am." "Then why weren't you there when Mom was sick, when she called for you?" The accusation hung between them, all the more powerful for its quiet delivery. "I didn't know," Thaddeus said, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "If I had known about you, about your mother's illness, nothing would have kept me away. Nothing." Octavia studied him with unnerving intensity, those Blackwood eyes, his eyes, seeming to peer into his soul. "Aunt Persephone says you're very rich, that you have buildings with your name on them." "That's true, but we had to sell Mom's paintings to pay for medicine." The simple statement, delivered with a child's brutal honesty, struck harder than any corporate negotiation. Before Thaddeus could formulate a response, the other 3 girls entered with Persephone. Breakfast was a surreal experience. The quadruplets, while identical in appearance, revealed distinctly different personalities. Arwen, the natural leader, organized her sisters and directed conversation. Freya, analytical and precise, corrected factual inaccuracies and kept track of time. Vesper, imaginative and expressive, illustrated her points with dramatic gestures. And Octavia, observant and thoughtful, spoke rarely but with impact. They were, collectively and individually, extraordinary. "We have questions," Arwen announced as the meal concluded, pulling a folded paper from her uniform pocket. "We made a list." Thaddeus smiled despite himself. "Of course you did." "Number 1, she began formally. "Will we have to leave our school? We have friends there." "What school do you attend?" "Callisto Academy," Freya supplied. "For gifted children. We're all on scholarship." Pride colored her voice. Thaddeus recognized the name. One of the most prestigious experimental education centers in the country, with a focus on developing exceptional talent. "No, you won't have to leave your school." "Number 2, Arwen continued, "will we have to move away from Aunt Persephone?" Thaddeus glanced at Persephone, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "That's something we'll need to discuss." "Further," he hedged, "Number 3, do you even want us?" The bluntness silenced the room. 4 identical faces turned to him, vulnerability evident beneath their precocious composure. "Yes," Thaddeus answered without hesitation. "I want to know you, to be part of your lives. I've missed 9 years. I don't want to miss another day." "Number 4, Arwen pressed on, though her voice had softened. "Are you going to take a DNA test? Aunt Persephone says that's what rich men do when they don't trust people." Thaddeus considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally, "I don't need a test to know you're my daughters." The answer seemed to satisfy them, but Persephone's expression remained skeptical. "Final question," Arwen said, refolding the paper. "When can we see where you live?" That evening, after numerous calls to his household staff, Thaddeus brought the girls to his penthouse for dinner. The 3-story residence occupied the crown of the Obsidian Tower, offering 360-degree views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. "It looks like a spaceship," Vesper breathed, pressing her face against the glass. "Where are all your things?" Freya asked, noting the minimalist decor. "What do you mean?" "Your books, your collections, your memories," she clarified, gesturing to the austere surroundings. "Where do you keep what matters?" The innocent question struck him forcefully. The truth was, nothing here really mattered to him. The penthouse was a showcase, a statement of status rather than a home. He had kept nothing of sentimental value after Lyra left. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that might evoke the pain of their separation. "Perhaps we could find some things that matter together," he suggested. As the evening progressed, Thaddeus observed his daughters with growing wonder. They moved through his sterile domain, transforming it with their curious energy. Vesper discovered the grand piano he had never learned to play, and revealed she had inherited Lyra's musical talent. Freya methodically catalogued the contents of his bookshelves, rearranging volumes into a more logical order. Octavia silently explored his private art gallery, pausing longest before an abstract painting, the only piece by Lyra he had kept. Arwen, meanwhile, had found her way to his home office and was examining the family crest displayed on the wall. "The Blackwood insignia," Thaddeus explained, joining her. "It represents our family legacy." "Our family," she repeated, testing the words. "Mom has had paintings of this symbol. She said it was part of our heritage, even if you never acknowledged us." The comment stung, but before he could respond, his private elevator chimed. The doors opened to reveal Bellamy Frost, his chief of staff, immaculately dressed despite the late hour. "Mr. Blackwood, you've been unreachable all day. The board is in chaos. Tokyo is threatening to walk and—" Bellamy stopped abruptly, registering the presence of the 4 identical girls. His normally impassive face registered shock, quickly masked. "I apologize for the intrusion. I wasn't aware you had guests." "Bellamy," Thaddeus said, his voice dangerously calm. "Meet Arwen, Freya, Vesper, and Octavia, my daughters." Bellamy's complexion paled. I don't understand." "Don't you?" Thaddeus challenged. No recollection of intercepting communications from Lyra Blackwood over the years? Medical records, birth announcements, requests for assistance during her illness? Sir, I've always acted in your best interest, Bellamy began, composure cracking. After the divorce, we agreed Ms. Blackwood was unstable. The pregnancy claim was clearly false given your medical history. Yet here they stand, Thaddeus interrupted, gesturing to the quadruplets who were watching the exchange with wary fascination. 4 living proofs that you lied to me for nearly a decade, depriving me of my children and them of their father. What's happening? Vesper whispered loudly to Arwen. I believe Daddy just fired this man, Arwen replied with surprising satisfaction. Fired is an inadequate term for what's about to happen, Thaddeus corrected, reaching for his phone. Lyra, I need the legal team, yes now, and contact security to escort Bellamy from the building. His credentials are being revoked as we speak. As Bellamy was removed from the penthouse, Thaddeus turned to find his daughters regarding him with new eyes, a mixture of wariness and something like respect. He kept Mom's letters from you? Octavia asked quietly. Yes, Thaddeus confirmed, kneeling to their level. I never knew she was trying to reach me. I never knew about you. Would you have come if you knew? Freya pressed, ever the pragmatist. Immediately, Thaddeus promised. Nothing would have kept me away. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in the guest suite his staff had hastily prepared, Thaddeus sat alone in his office, examining the contents of a secure file Lyra had sent over. The preliminary investigation into Bellamy's activities revealed a disturbing pattern. Not only had his chief of staff intercepted Lyra's communications, but he had actively monitored her movements after the divorce, flagging any attempt she made to contact Thaddeus's professional or social circles. Most disturbing was evidence that Bellamy had redirected significant funds from Thaddeus's personal accounts, funds that had apparently financed a lavish lifestyle far beyond his salary. But why go to such lengths? What could Bellamy possibly gain from keeping Thaddeus ignorant of his own children? The answer lay buried in the final pages of the report, transfers to a shell corporation that traced back to Chimera Biotech, Obsidian's chief rival, and the company currently poised to benefit most from the collapse of the Tokyo deal. Bellamy hadn't just betrayed Thaddeus personally. He had been working as a corporate spy, actively undermining Obsidian from within. Keeping Thaddeus isolated, workaholic, and emotionally disconnected had served his handler's purposes perfectly. A soft noise from the doorway interrupted his thoughts. Octavia stood there in borrowed pajamas, clutching a small stuffed rabbit. You should be asleep, Thaddeus said gently. I heard you thinking, she replied cryptically. Mom could always tell when my brain wouldn't turn off too. He smiled despite himself. Would you like some warm milk? That used to help me sleep when I was your age. Octavia shook her head. I want to show you something. She approached his desk and carefully placed a folded paper before him. Mom made us each one before she died. She said to give them to you when we found you. Thaddeus unfolded what appeared to be a child's drawing, 4 identical stick figures holding hands with a much taller one. Below, in a child's careful printing, our family someday, love Octavia. She made us draw these every year on our birthday, Octavia explained. Said if we kept believing, eventually they'd come true. Thaddeus felt something crack inside his carefully maintained composure. Thank you for sharing this with me. Octavia studied him with those uncanny eyes. You're sad like we were, but maybe now we can all be less sad together. With that profound observation, she turned and padded back to bed, leaving Thaddeus to contemplate a truth so simple yet so transformative it threatened to overwhelm him. Perhaps they could all be less sad together. The following morning, Thaddeus woke to unfamiliar sounds echoing through his penthouse. Childish laughter, rapid footsteps, the clatter of dishware. For a moment, disorientation gripped him. These were not sounds that belonged in his meticulously ordered world. Then memory flooded back, and with it, a strange lightness he hadn't felt in years. He found the quadruplets in his rarely used kitchen, where his bewildered chef was attempting to accommodate their 4 distinct breakfast preferences. Arwen wanted protein-heavy fare to feed her brain. Freya insisted on symmetrically arranged fruit slices. Vesper required her pancakes shaped like musical notes. And Octavia ate whatever was placed before her, but only after arranging it into a tiny, still life. "Good morning," Thaddeus said, pausing in the doorway to absorb the scene. 4 identical faces turned to him, expressions ranging from Arwen's measured assessment to Vesper's unguarded delight. "Your kitchen is bigger than our whole apartment was," Freya observed, her practical nature quantifying everything. "But you don't have proper cereal." "I'll make a note," Thaddeus replied seriously, earning a solemn nod of approval. After breakfast, the logistics of their new arrangement required attention. The girls needed clothes and personal items from Persephone's apartment. School administrators needed to be informed of changed emergency contacts. Legal paperwork required filing to establish Thaddeus's paternity formally. Throughout these practical matters, he observed his daughters with growing fascination. They operated as a unit while maintaining distinct identities, a phenomenon he found both biologically remarkable and emotionally compelling. "You stare at us a lot," Arwen noted as they rode in his private car toward Persephone's modest apartment in the university district. "Is it because we look the same?" "Partly," Thaddeus admitted, "but mostly because I'm trying to understand who each of you is as an individual." "That's easy," Vesper piped up. "I'm the artistic one, Freya's the smart one, Arwen's the bossy. The leader," Arwen corrected with dignity. "And Octavia is the quiet one who sees everything," Vesper finished. "Mom said we're like elements. I'm fire, Freya's earth, Arwen's air, and Octavia's water." "That's remarkably apt," Thaddeus observed. "Mom understood people," Octavia said softly. "She said you did too, but only when you paid attention." Another insight that hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Lyra had always accused him of seeing people as patterns rather than individuals. A talent in business, but a limitation in personal relationships. Persephone met them at her apartment door, her frail appearance even more pronounced in daylight. She led them into a modest living space, made remarkable by the abundance of Lyra's artwork covering every wall. Landscapes, abstracts, and numerous portraits of the quadruplets at various ages. "She painted constantly," Persephone explained, noting Thaddeus's absorption in the images, even when the treatments made her too weak to stand at an easel. Said it was important to capture everything for when you finally met them. The girls scattered to their shared bedroom to pack essentials, leaving the adults in uncomfortable silence. "Their legal guardianship isn't settled," Persephone said finally. "I've been managing with temporary status since Lyra's death." "I'll have my attorneys expedite permanent arrangements," Thaddeus replied, "for both paternity confirmation and custody." "And if I object?" Thaddeus met her challenging gaze directly. "Would you, when your health is clearly deteriorating?" Persephone's defiance faltered. "They need stability. These past 5 years have been nothing but loss and upheaval." "I agree," Thaddeus said, surprising her, "which is why I'm not suggesting they be uprooted completely. They'll maintain their school enrollment, their connection to you, their established activities. I'm adding to their lives, not subtracting from it." His reasonableness seemed to disarm her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "The arrogant bastard who threw my sister out when she needed him most. The heartless tyrant who built a fortune while his children sold their mother's paintings to pay medical bills." The accusation stung, but Thaddeus couldn't deny its fundamental truth. "That man existed," he acknowledged, But he was operating on false information and misplaced priorities. And now? Now I'm attempting to become someone worthy of the responsibility I've been given. Persephone studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. Lyra always said there was more to you than you allowed people to see. I never believed her until now. The girls emerged with backpacks and small suitcases, each clutching items of obvious emotional significance. Arwen with a leather-bound journal, Freya with a collection of scientific awards, Vesper with her mother's flute, and Octavia with a case of specialized paintbrushes. As they prepared to leave, Persephone pulled Thaddeus aside, pressing a small key into his palm. Lyra's studio is in a converted warehouse across town. Unit 412, she left explicit instructions that you should see it when you found the girls. It's where she kept everything she couldn't tell you in letters. The cryptic message lingered in Thaddeus's mind as they departed. What could Lyra possibly have needed to tell him that couldn't be conveyed in her numerous attempted communications? That evening, after settling the girls with dinner and a movie supervised by his newly hired child development specialist, recruited from Callisto Academy at an exorbitant salary, Thaddeus made his way to the address Persephone had provided. The converted warehouse occupied a formerly industrial district, now populated by artists and creative startups. Unit 412 was secured by an advanced biometric lock that seemed incongruous with the building's bohemian atmosphere. The key, Persephone, had given him operated a secondary mechanical override. Apparently, Lyra had anticipated potential power failures. Inside, Thaddeus found not just a studio, but a documentation center. One entire wall displayed a timeline of the Quadruplets' development. Ultrasound images, growth charts, developmental milestones, and medical records. Another wall featured hundreds of photographs showing the girls from infancy through their current age, carefully annotated with dates and significant events. But it was the third wall that stopped him cold. A comprehensive investigation into Bellamy Frost's connections to Chimera Biotech, including surveillance photos, financial trails, and copies of intercepted communications. At the center was a photograph of Thaddeus himself, unconscious in a hospital bed, dated 29 years earlier, his mysterious illness at boarding school. A sealed envelope labeled, "For Thaddeus when you're ready," lay on a workstation beneath this disturbing display. Inside, he found a letter in Lyra's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Thaddeus, if you're reading this, you've found our daughters and begun to unravel the truth Bellamy worked so hard to conceal. What you don't yet know is why. Your supposed sterility wasn't an accident or a medical anomaly. It was the result of unauthorized experimentation conducted on students at Whitmore Academy during that summer science program. Experimentation funded by a company that would later be acquired by Chimera Biotech. I discovered this while researching fertility options after our initial difficulties conceiving. The timeline aligned perfectly with your illness, and the symptoms matched previously undisclosed side effects of an experimental compound being developed for military applications. A compound designed to temporarily suppress fertility in combat zones, but which proved to have lasting effects. When I approached you with this information, Bellamy intercepted my research and convinced you I was creating elaborate excuses for our inability to conceive. Remember those crazy conspiracy theories he said I was developing? This was what he meant. I never gave up researching even after our separation. What I learned was even more disturbing. The compound had unexpected genetic effects in a small percentage of subjects. Effects that might explain how, against all medical predictions, I became pregnant with identical quadruplets after just one intimate encounter following our separation. Our daughters are unique, Thaddeus, not just in the rarity of identical, quadruplets, but potentially in their genetic structure. I've documented subtle accelerated development patterns in their cognitive abilities, immune responses, and physical coordination. Nothing alarming, in fact, quite beneficial, but definitely outside standard parameters. I believe Bellamy kept monitoring me after our divorce on someone else's orders. When I became visibly pregnant, his surveillance intensified. Someone at Chimera doesn't want evidence of that experimental program to surface, especially not in the form of 4 thriving children born to one of the test subjects who was supposed to be permanently sterile. Protect them, my love. They are extraordinary in more ways than you yet understand, and there are people who would see them as research subjects rather than children if they knew the truth. Always yours, Lyra. Thaddeus read the letter twice, his understanding of the situation shifting fundamentally with each paragraph. This wasn't just about corporate espionage or personal betrayal. If Lyra's research was accurate, his daughters represented living evidence of illegal human experimentation with unexpected genetic consequences. Experimentation that Chimera had every reason to keep buried. His phone vibrated with an incoming call. Lyra, his COO. "I've been analyzing the intelligence from Bellamy's devices," she said without preamble. "The situation is more complex than we initially thought. His handler at Chimera appears to be significantly high-ranking, possibly C-suite level. And I'm beginning to understand just how deep this goes," Thaddeus replied, scanning the documented evidence covering Lyra's studio walls. "I need comprehensive security protocols implemented immediately. Full protection for the quadruplets. Background checks on all staff with access to my residences or offices, and complete surveillance sweep for listening devices." "Already initiated," Lyra confirmed, efficiency evident in her tone. "There's something else you should know. Bellamy made a call immediately after being escorted from the building yesterday. The number traces to a private line at the Evermore Institute." Thaddeus felt his blood chill. The Evermore Institute, Chimera's advanced research facility supposedly, dedicated to longevity studies, but rumored to conduct classified work beyond public regulatory oversight. "Keep him under surveillance," Thaddeus ordered, "and Lyra, trust no one with this information, absolutely no one." After disconnecting, Thaddeus continued examining Lyra's research. Among her files, he discovered something that made his breath catch: DNA sequence analyses for all 4 girls, conducted secretly by a geneticist friend who owed Lyra a favor. The results confirmed subtle but significant genetic markers that didn't match either Lyra's or Thaddeus's baseline profiles. Enhanced cognitive processing, accelerated cellular regeneration, improved immune response. The implications were staggering. If the quadruplets' unique genetic profile resulted from that experimental compound, they represented both a miraculous outcome and a potential threat to Chimera's carefully constructed public image. Moreover, they might be the key to understanding modifications that could benefit humanity, modifications currently being developed in secret by the Evermore Institute. His daughters weren't just heirs to his business empire. They were living proof of unauthorized human experimentation with unexpected beneficial outcomes. Outcomes that certain parties would pay any price to study, control, or if necessary, eliminate. Thaddeus gathered the most critical documentation and secured the studio, his mind racing with implications and countermeasures. On the drive back to Obsidian Tower, he formulated contingency plans, identifying trusted allies and potential safe houses. The business titan, who had built his reputation on calculated risk assessment, now applied those same skills to protecting the 4 small lives that had suddenly become his entire world. Upon returning home, he found the quadruplets already asleep, the day's excitement having exhausted them. Thaddeus moved silently through their temporary quarters, checking on each child with a mixture of wonder and fierce protectiveness. Only hours ago, he had been concerned with custody arrangements and adjusting to fatherhood. Now, he understood that the stakes were infinitely higher. Octavia stirred as he paused at her bedside. "Did you see Mom's special place?" she asked, sleepily. "I did," he confirmed, smoothing her copper hair away from her face. "She left some important information for me." "About the experiments?" Thaddeus froze. "What experiments, Octavia?" "The ones that made us different." Her eyes, identical to his own, reflected wisdom beyond her years. "Assai attentas de turn. Mom said we're special because of science mistakes that turned into miracles, that someday you'd protect us from the bad scientists." "You knew about this?" "Not everything, just pieces she told us before she got too sick." Octavia yawned. "She said you'd figure it out because you're smart like Freya." Thaddeus felt simultaneous awe and fury. Awe at Lyra's foresight in preparing the girls without frightening them, fury at the circumstances that had necessitated such preparation. "Your mother was right," he said quietly. "I will protect you, all of you, no matter what it takes." As Octavia drifted back to sleep, Thaddeus retreated to his office, where he initiated the most significant corporate reorganization of his career. By dawn, he had transferred operational control of Obsidian's daily functions to Lyra, liquidated personal assets worth billions, established 4 irrevocable trusts for his daughters, and created a separate research foundation dedicated to investigating genetic modifications with healing applications, a foundation that would eventually leverage Lyra's documentation to expose Chimera's unethical practices while advancing legitimate scientific inquiry. The final step was the most personal. He contacted Alexandra Devereaux, the fiercest litigator in the country and his former classmate from Whitmore Academy. "I need to speak with you about the summer science program of 2006, he said when she answered, "and about Chimera Biotech's involvement in what happened to us." Alexandra's sharp intake of breath confirmed she understood the significance. "After all these years? Why now?" "Because I have living proof of the long-term effects," Thaddeus replied. 4 identical reasons, actually." A protracted silence followed. "The confidentiality agreement was signed under duress and without full disclosure of what had been done to us," Thaddeus interrupted. "And I believe you know as well as I do that at least 3 of our classmates died from complications after asking too many questions." "What are you proposing?" "A class action suit representing all surviving test subjects, full disclosure of all research derived from those unauthorized experiments, and most importantly, legal protection for any descendants exhibiting genetic modifications resulting from the compound. You're declaring war on one of the most powerful biotech conglomerates in the world," Alexandra warned. "No," Thaddeus corrected grimly. "I'm declaring war on those who thought they could experiment on children without consequences, those who separated me from my family, those who might still pose a threat to my daughters." "Your daughters." Alexandra's voice sharpened with understanding. "The modifications are heritable." "More than that," Thaddeus confirmed. "They appear to have been amplified and stabilized in the 2nd generation. My quadruplets show accelerated development, patterns that could revolutionize genetic medicine if properly researched under ethical guidelines." Another silence then. "I'll be on the next flight. Secure communications only from now on." As dawn broke over the city, Thaddeus stood at the window of his penthouse, watching his sleeping daughters reflected in the glass, while the first rays of sunlight illuminated Obsidian Tower. The empire he had built now seemed secondary to The legacy sleeping peacefully behind him, a legacy born of unauthorized experimentation, but transformed into something miraculous through Lyra's love and determination. He had failed Lyra through blind trust in the wrong people. He would not fail their daughters. "Mr. Blackwood," his security chief murmured from the doorway. "The enhanced protocols have been implemented, and we've detected unusual activity at the Evermore Institute. Multiple vehicles departing at dawn, including an unmarked transport suitable for human cargo," Thaddeus finished grimly. "They're mobilizing faster than anticipated. Initiate protocol sanctuary immediately." The security chief nodded and withdrew, already activating the elaborate contingency plan designed to move the quadruplets to a secure location outside Chimera's immediate reach. Thaddeus turned back to watch his daughters, marveling at their peaceful sleep despite the gathering storm. They had already endured so much: their mother's illness and death, years of financial instability, and the absence of a father they had only known through Lyra's stories. Now they faced a threat they couldn't fully comprehend, from people who saw them as experimental outcomes rather than children. People who had already demonstrated willingness to separate families and falsify medical records to protect their secrets. Thaddeus Blackwood, who had built a trillion-dollar empire through strategic genius and uncompromising determination, now focused all those qualities on a single purpose: ensuring his daughters would have the childhood, security, and future that Chimera's actions had nearly denied them. The battle lines were drawn, the stakes established, and unlike 9 years ago, when he had rejected Lyra's truth out of pride and misplaced trust, Thaddeus now embraced a father's most fundamental responsibility: protecting his children at any cost, even if that cost included dismantling the very power structures that had defined his adult life, even if it meant exposing his own unwitting role in a decades-long conspiracy, even if it required becoming someone he had never imagined. He could be, not just a father in name, but in every action, decision, and sacrifice. As the sun fully crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the city he had helped build, Thaddeus made a silent promise to Lyra and to the 4 small miracles she had protected alone for so long. The truth would finally come to light. Justice would be served, and their extraordinary family would find its way forward, together. 2 months passed with the speed of light and the weight of eternity. The Obsidian Tower's residential floors had transformed from a sterile monument to success into a vibrant, sometimes chaotic home. Where minimalist furniture once stood in perfect alignment, colorful beanbags now spilled across Italian marble. Glass coffee tables displayed science projects rather than architectural magazines. The kitchen, previously used only for ceremonial meals with business associates, now regularly erupted with the scents of experimental cookies and the sounds of childish debate. Thaddeus stood at the window of his home office, watching the December snow swirl against the darkening sky. Behind him, holographic displays tracked the ongoing legal battle with Chimera Biotech, a complex chess game played across courtrooms, regulatory agencies, and media outlets. "Daddy!" Vesper's voice pulled him from strategic contemplation. "Can we practice now?" He turned to find her clutching the antique violin he'd gifted her after discovering her extraordinary musical aptitude, an aptitude that far exceeded typical developmental markers for her age. "Of course," he answered, setting aside the secure tablet containing Alexandra Devereaux's latest legal update. "Where are your sisters?" "Freya's rebuilding your quantum computer because she says it's inefficient," Vesper reported matter-of-factly. "Arwen's organizing our protection details schedule because she thinks they're tactically redundant, and Octavia's with Aunt Persephone in the solarium." Thaddeus bit back a smile. In 2 months, the quadruplets had thoroughly integrated themselves into every aspect of his life, imposing their distinct personalities on his world with the confidence of children who knew they were deeply wanted. The doorway to the winter solarium stood ajar, revealing Octavia seated beside Persephone's wheelchair. The child was sketching while her great-aunt dozed, oxygen tubes delicately looped around her ears. The experimental treatments had stabilized Persephone's condition, granting precious months rather than the weeks initially predicted. "Is she sleeping again?" Thaddeus asked softly, approaching his quietest daughter. Octavia nodded without looking up from her drawing. "Her breathing sounds better today." "What are you working on?" She tilted the sketchbook to reveal a remarkably detailed rendering of Persephone's profile, capturing both fragility and inner strength with uncanny precision. "You have your mother's gift," Thaddeus observed, genuinely impressed. "Mom said art sees truth that eyes miss," Octavia replied, adding a final shadow with her charcoal. "I'm trying to capture Aunt Persephone's courage." The insight struck Thaddeus anew. These were not ordinary children, regardless of the genetic modifications. Their emotional intelligence and perceptiveness regularly caught him off guard, forcing him to engage on a level he'd never anticipated. "Alexandra's coming tonight," he told her gently. "She has updates about the case. The one about the scientists who changed you, and us." Octavia's direct gaze, so like his own, held no fear, only curiosity. "Yes, we're making progress identifying others who were affected." Octavia considered this. "Will they have special children too?" "We don't know yet. You four might be unique in how the modifications express themselves generationally." "Like miracles," she said decisively. "That's what Mom called us, scientific miracles." She was right, Thaddeus agreed, his throat tightening. The security alert chimed softly on his wristband. Alexandra had arrived. "Go practice with Vesper," he suggested to Octavia. "I'll sit with Aunt Persephone until she wakes." Alexandra Devereaux entered Thaddeus's private office like a force of nature. Her impeccable charcoal suit and silver-streaked black hair projecting authority honed through decades battling corporate giants. At 53, she remained as formidable as when they'd first met as teenagers at Whitmore Academy. "We've identified 37 surviving test subjects," she announced without preamble, activating a secure holographic display. 7 have children with notable genetic markers similar to your daughter's, though none as pronounced, and none with multiple births." "And the records?" Thaddeus asked, scanning the encrypted data. "Fragmentary but damning. The program was called Project Genesis, ostensibly researching reversible fertility control for military applications. In reality, they were attempting targeted genetic enhancement with reproductive suppression as a containment strategy." Thaddeus absorbed this information grimly. They were creating enhanced humans, but ensuring they couldn't reproduce. Except, the suppression wasn't permanent in all cases. Precisely. Most subjects remained sterile, explaining why the unexpected quadruple birth sent them into panic mode. Alexandra's expression hardened. "They filed for emergency injunction against our discovery requests, claiming proprietary research protections. Judge Harrington won't grant it," Thaddeus stated with certainty, Alexandra's eyebrow raised. "Inside information. Her daughter was at Whitmore 5 years after us. Different experimental protocol, similar lack of informed consent. She's been waiting decades for this case." The intercom chimed softly. "Sir," his security chief's voice interrupted, "we've detected unauthorized surveillance drones in the restricted airspace around the tower. Countermeasures engaged." Alexandra and Thaddeus exchanged knowing glances. "They're getting desperate," she observed. "Good. Desperate opponents make mistakes." Thaddeus manipulated the holographic display, bringing up a detailed timeline. "Our court filing goes public tomorrow. I've arranged simultaneous press briefings in 7 countries, coordinated release of supporting evidence through trusted journalists, and backdoor meetings with 3 regulatory agencies. Chimera won't go down without scorching the earth, Alexandra warned. Their entire market valuation hinges on technologies derived from these unauthorized experiments. I'm counting on their scorched earth tactics, Thaddeus replied, revealing the true depth of his strategy. Every excessive response provides additional evidence and damages their public standing. Their board is already fracturing. Our intelligence indicates at least 3 directors have begun private negotiations to distance themselves. Alexandra studied him with newfound respect. This isn't just about justice for the test subjects or protection for your daughters, is it? You're systematically dismantling Chimera to acquire their legitimate research assets at fire sale prices. The ethical applications of their genetic research could transform medicine, Thaddeus acknowledged, but only if separated from the corrupt foundation on which it was built. A soft knock interrupted their strategic discussion. Arwen stood in the doorway, her posture deliberately formal. "Ms. Alexandra, may I ask a legal question?" she requested with the gravity of someone 3 times her age. Alexandra's professional demeanor softened immediately. "Of course. If the court recognizes we're genetically unique, does that make us property or people?" The question hung in the air, its profound implications belying the child's voice that delivered it. Thaddeus felt his heart constrict at the fear underlying his daughter's apparently academic inquiry. Alexandra knelt to meet Arwen at eye level. "You are unquestionably people, Arwen. Human beings with full legal rights and protections. One of our primary arguments rests on the fundamental principle that no person, regardless of how their genetic structure came to be, can be treated as research property." Arwen processed this with visible relief. "And they can't take us away for experiments?" "Never!" Thaddeus interjected fiercely, moving to place a protective hand on her shoulder. "That's what this entire legal battle ensures. Your right to grow up as children, not subjects." "Good," Arwen declared, practical as always, "because we've decided we want to testify." "We?" Alexandra questioned. "My sisters and I. We discussed it and voted. If we're evidence of the experiments, we should speak for ourselves." Arwen's expression brooked no argument despite her youth. "Mom always said our voices matter." The adults exchanged glances, recognizing both the wisdom and the potential complications of such testimony. "We'll discuss this with your sisters," Thaddeus promised, recognizing the determination in his daughter's stance, a determination that mirrored his own. After Arwen departed, Alexandra spoke quietly. "She's remarkably self-possessed for 9 years old." "They all are," Thaddeus confirmed. "The question is whether that's Lyra's influence, my genetics, or something more directly related to the experimental compound." "Does it matter?" Alexandra challenged. "They're extraordinary children regardless of source." "It matters for their protection," Thaddeus replied grimly, "and for understanding who else might be at risk." That night, after the quadruplets were asleep, Thaddeus convened a secure virtual meeting with his most trusted team members, Lyra managing Obsidian's corporate interests, Alexandra heading legal strategy, Dr. Emery Fulton overseeing medical research, and Niall Sullivan directing security operations. "Chimera's desperation is escalating," Niall reported, his Irish accent more pronounced under stress. "We've intercepted communications suggesting they're preparing some form of extreme countermeasure timed to preempt tomorrow's public filing." "Define extreme," Thaddeus demanded. "Their internal classification marks it as existential response. Protocol," Niall clarified, "which typically indicates actions outside legal boundaries." "Their final play will target the quadruplets," Thaddeus concluded. "Without physical evidence of second-generation effects, they can claim all our documentation is fabricated. The genetic profiles are irrefutable, Dr. Fulton objected. Only if independent experts can verify them using samples from living subjects, Alexandra countered. They're planning to eliminate access to the children, either by challenging custody or through more direct means. The implications silence the virtual room momentarily. Sanctuary protocol remains active, Nile confirmed. 3 secure extraction routes, redundant safe locations, 24-hour surveillance. They can't approach without detection. Unless they have someone inside, Lyra suggested quietly. The possibility, though considered in their contingency planning, struck with renewed force. Background checks had been exhaustive, but Chimera's resources were substantial. We accelerate, Thaddeus decided. Release the filing at midnight instead of morning. Activate all media contacts simultaneously. And most importantly, move the girls to Sanctuary Omega now, tonight, before they can mobilize. That location is known only to 5 people, Nile confirmed. Make it 3, Thaddeus ordered. You, me, and Persephone. No electronic trail, no shared coordinates, nothing that could be compromised. As the team dispersed to execute his instructions, Thaddeus moved through the penthouse, methodically checking security systems. In the Quadruplets' bedroom, he paused, watching their peaceful sleep. Identical faces relaxed in dreams, untroubled by the storm gathering around them. The sight strengthened his resolve. These children, miracles born from scientific hubris and Lyra's unfathomable strength, deserved childhoods unmarred by fear. They deserved to develop their unique gifts naturally, not under laboratory observation. And they deserved to know their mother had fought with everything she possessed to protect them, a battle he would now continue with equal determination. Gently waking each child, Thaddeus explained the midnight journey as an adventure. Remember our emergency drills. Tonight we're practicing for real. The girls, trained through seemingly playful exercises over recent weeks, responded with surprising composure. Each gathered their pre-packed adventure bag containing essentials and irreplaceable treasures. Arwen's journal of family observations, Freya's collection of scientific calculations, Vesper's treasured musical compositions, and Octavia's portfolio of drawings. Is Aunt Persephone coming? Freya asked, practically, as they boarded the private elevator that would take them to the secure underground garage. Her medical team is already at our destination, Thaddeus assured them. She'll join us tomorrow. The journey proceeded exactly as rehearsed. Unmarked vehicle, circuitous route, strategic vehicle changes, finally boarding an unremarkable private train car attached to a regular overnight service heading north along the coastline. Sanctuary Omega, located on a private island, accessible only by helicopter or specially designed amphibious craft, had originally been Thaddeus's personal retreat, a place even his closest associates knew existed but couldn't precisely locate. Now it represented safety in its most fundamental form. As dawn broke over the ocean horizon, the Quadruplets stood on the observation deck of the transport vessel approaching the mist-shrouded island, their copper hair whipping in the sea breeze. It looks like Cassiopeia, Octavia observed quietly. Mom's island. That's intentional, Thaddeus confirmed, joining them at the railing. I purchased it after reading about your birthplace in your mother's journals. Why? Arwen asked, ever direct. Because I wanted to understand the world that shaped you, he answered honestly, and because I thought you might find comfort in similar surroundings while we navigate this challenge. Vesper slipped her small hand into his, a gesture of trust that still had the power to humble him. Are we hiding or fighting? Both, Thaddeus admitted, deciding these remarkable children deserved honesty. Sometimes strategic withdrawal creates the space needed to win the larger battle. The island emerged from the morning mist, rocky shores giving way to dense forest, and finally revealing a modern structure integrated harmoniously with the natural landscape. Unlike his urban penthouse, this residence was designed for warmth and comfort rather than impression. "Welcome to your mother's final gift," Thaddeus said softly as they docked. This island was her dream, mentioned in her journals repeatedly as the place she imagined raising you in safety. "I purchased it last month and had it prepared according to her descriptions." The quadruplets absorbed this information with characteristic intelligence, recognizing the significance beyond mere physical safety. This wasn't just a secure location, it was tangible proof of their father's commitment to honoring their mother's vision for their future. As they explored their temporary home, discovering rooms designed specifically for each child's interests and common spaces that encouraged family connection, Thaddeus received the secure transmission he'd been anticipating. "Filing complete," Alexandra reported. "Media explosion already beginning. Chimera stock down 17% in pre-market trading. Their security team attempted access to the penthouse at 3:14 a.m., retreating when they found it empty. And Persephone, secure. Their surveillance missed the medical transport entirely. Maintain information blackout regarding our location," Thaddeus instructed. "The next 48 hours are critical." Those hours unfolded exactly as predicted. Chimera issued vehement denials, attempted character assassination against Thaddeus and other test subjects who had come forward, and filed emergency motions to suppress evidence. Each desperate action further undermined their credibility and created additional media coverage. On the island, insulated from the chaos by careful information filtering, the quadruplets established a new routine that incorporated academic studies, artistic pursuits, and outdoor exploration. Persephone arrived as promised, her frail health seemingly buoyed by the peaceful surroundings and clean ocean air. On the third evening, as Thaddeus supervised the girls practicing advanced water safety in the indoor pool, skills he hoped they'd never need but insisted they master, Persephone beckoned him to the observation area. "You've exceeded my expectations," she admitted, watching her great-nieces with evident pride. "When Lyra made me promise to find you if something happened to her, I thought she was clinging to a romantic delusion. I've often wondered why she never told anyone who their father was," Thaddeus mused. "It would have simplified matters greatly." She wanted them to form their own opinions," Persephone explained. "And she worried about Chimera's surveillance. Names in official documents could be tracked. She protected them in every way possible. As you're doing now." Persephone's gaze was evaluative. "Though I notice you've leveraged this situation to potentially acquire Chimera's legitimate assets at bargain prices." Thaddeus didn't deny it. "Business opportunities and justice occasionally align. The important outcome is that the experimental programs will be dismantled, victims compensated, and the beneficial research preserved under ethical oversight. And the girls will have the childhood Lyra wanted for them, safe, nurturing, filled with opportunities to develop their unique gifts naturally, even if those gifts prove to be enhanced by the modifications," Persephone pressed. Thaddeus watched as Octavia executed a perfect underwater rescue of a training dummy, a maneuver requiring strength and coordination well beyond typical 9-year-old capabilities. "Especially then," he confirmed, "whatever advantages they may have inherited, they remain children first, not research subjects, not corporate assets, not weapons to be deployed. Just extraordinary children who deserve the chance to determine their own futures." Persephone seemed satisfied with this answer. From her wheelchair, she withdrew an envelope bearing Lyra's distinctive handwriting. "She left this for when I was certain of your commitment. I believe the time has come." The letter, written during Lyra's final days, contained coordinates and access codes to a hidden vault on Cassiopeia Island, a vault containing comprehensive documentation of the quadruplets' developmental patterns, medical anomalies, and genetic markers since birth. Information too sensitive to risk exposure, but too valuable to destroy. She always believed you would find them eventually, Persephone explained, and that when you did, you would need this information to protect them properly. She had more faith in me than I deserved, Thaddeus acknowledged, emotion thickening his voice. Perhaps, Persephone agreed without sugarcoating, or perhaps she simply recognized potential you hadn't yet actualized. 1 week into their island sanctuary, as global media continued dissecting Chimera's collapsing defense, Thaddeus received confirmation that the threat had evolved exactly as anticipated. Chimera's board had ousted the executives most directly, implicated in the historical experiments and ongoing cover-up. Investigations by multiple regulatory agencies had frozen their most controversial research divisions, and most significantly, their stock had plummeted to the point where Thaddeus's carefully positioned shell companies could begin acquiring controlling interest. "We've won the first battle," Alexandra informed him during their secure daily briefing. "Judge Harrington has ordered full discovery and appointed an independent special master to oversee document preservation." "And the personal threat assessment?" Thaddeus pressed. "Significantly reduced but not eliminated. The most dangerous individuals, those with direct knowledge of the original experiments, have been separated from institutional resources. However, they remain at large with personal motivations to suppress evidence." Thaddeus absorbed this analysis while watching his daughters through the window, engaged in an animated discussion with the marine biologist he'd hired to supplement their education. The 4 copperheads bent together over tide pools represented everything he now valued above power, wealth, or corporate victory. "We'll maintain heightened security indefinitely," he decided. "But it's time to begin transitioning toward normalcy. The girls need stability, not perpetual crisis mode." Normalcy being relative," Alexandra observed with a rare smile. "Those children will never lead conventional lives, regardless of their genetic distinctions." "No," Thaddeus agreed, "but they can lead extraordinary lives on their own terms, not defined by corporate interests or scientific exploitation." That evening, with the quadruplets tucked securely in their island bedrooms, Thaddeus stood on the cliffside observation deck, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against ancient stone. The moon cast a silvery path across the dark water, reminiscent of the night he had first read Lyra's complete journals, the night he had truly understood what she had endured alone. A slight sound alerted him to a small presence. Octavia, Eva. The night owl had joined him, wrapped in a blanket against the ocean breeze. "You should be asleep," he said gently. "I wanted to show you something first." She handed him a drawing, a family portrait unlike her earlier childish renderings. This showed all 6 of them, the quadruplets, Thaddeus, and Persephone, standing together on this very cliff. But floating above them, rendered with remarkable spiritual sensitivity, was Lyra's luminous presence, watching over them all. "Mum's still with us," Octavia explained simply, "just differently than before." Thaddeus studied the image, moved beyond words by his daughter's perception and artistic expression of their complex family constellation. "She would be so proud of you," he managed finally. "Of all of you." "And of you too," Octavia added. "With certainty, you became who she always said you could be." The simple observation from his quietest daughter crystallized the transformation of recent months. The man who had once defined himself through corporate acquisitions and strategic victories now measured success by his daughter's security and happiness. The emotional walls constructed after Lyra's departure had crumbled in the face of 4 identical children who refused to allow him to remain distant. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Octavia asked, not with childish worry, but with the practical assessment that characterized all the quadruplets. Yes, Thaddeus promised, drawing her close as they gazed out over the moonlit water. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be extraordinary. Together. 6 months later, on the anniversary of their first meeting at Lyra's grave, the Blackwood family returned to Evergreen Memorial Gardens. The cemetery's administrative offices had been surprised by Thaddeus's request to relocate Lyra's memorial to their private island, but sufficient donation to the Perpetual Care Fund had smoothed any procedural complications. The new memorial occupied a peaceful cliffside overlooking the ocean, a location drawn directly from Lyra's journals describing her perfect resting place. The Quadruplets had designed it collaboratively. Arwen determined the orientation to capture optimal sunlight. Freya calculated the precise dimensions for harmonious proportions. Vespa selected the marble that would produce the most beautiful resonance in sea winds. And Octavia created the bas-relief portrait that captured Lyra's essence with uncanny accuracy. Standing before it now, the family formed a circle, as had become their tradition. Each placed a significant object, representing their past months, growth, achievements, creations, and memories they wished to share with Lyra. We come with gratitude, Thaddeus began the simple ceremony they had created together, for the life that connects us. For the love that found us, the Quadruplets, continued in unison. For the future we build together, Persephone completed from her wheelchair, her health stabilized by experimental treatments funded by Thaddeus's newly established research foundation. As they completed their ritual, Octavia stepped forward. With a small sculpture she had created, 9 interlocking rings of different materials forming an intricate whole. What does it represent? Thaddeus asked as she placed it carefully at the center of the memorial. Our family constellation, she explained. 4 for us, 1 for you, 1 for Mom, 1 for Aunt Persephone, 1 for where we came from, and 1 for where we're going. Her small fingers traced the connections between each element. Everything linked, nothing broken. Thaddeus felt his throat tighten with emotion as he regarded his daughter's profound artistic expression of their journey. From the corporate titan who had once defined success through acquisition and control, he had transformed into something he never anticipated, a father whose greatest achievement would be nurturing 4 remarkable lives into their fullest potential. Everything linked, he agreed softly, nothing broken. As they departed the memorial, walking along the cliffside path toward the home they now shared permanently, Thaddeus reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A chance encounter at a gravesite, 4 pairs of eyes identical to his own, a mystery spanning decades, a battle against corporate giants, but most significantly, a second chance he had never expected and would forever cherish, the opportunity to become the father Lyra had always believed he could be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.